Just, Philip, just in terms of where we are, Zelensky, obviously we have this NATO summit going on. There is this NATO light sort of deal that's been agreed. But, you know, a couple of days ago, it might even have been yesterday, Zelensky branded NATO absurd for refusing full membership. I'm just interested in your thoughts on this. I mean, I think most Western leaders said, well, there's no way that Ukraine can join NATO until this war is ending. Alan and I were talking about, well, when is that? What is the timeline on that? What are your thoughts on what has been offered so far? Is that enough, do you think?
I think it's significant. I think it is unprecedented in what NATO's done beforehand. I think President Zelensky, again, he was slightly naive in his language, but he doesn't understand the subtleties and the political nature of NATO, in that it's not just a military alliance, you know, it's a political alliance of 31, soon to be 32 countries. And you have to therefore convince 31 different parliaments, administrations, and all the rest of it to vote for what it is that's going on. And that takes an awful lot of work behind closed doors. But if you look at what has been offered, I think there has been a clear timeline for Ukraine to join. It's whenever the fighting stops and the conflict with Russia has finished. And the fact that Ukraine's not going to have to go through the membership application process, the MAP process, and there's going to be a lot of preparation put in beforehand, means that, you know, the conflict finishes on midnight on day one, and you know, the Ukraine could have signed and started its formal process by midday the next day, and it then just takes the time to go through those then 32 parliaments to get ratified.
I mean, I agree. I think it is very significant indeed. You know far more than I do about this situation, but just in terms of what this means, what does this mean for Putin?
Well, I think what it means a lot for Putin and a lot for the rest of the world. I think for Vladimir Putin, he can see resolve that there is within NATO. I think this is where Ben Wallace's comments are naive and will be exploited by Vladimir Putin to try and create further fissures across NATO. But NATO is so united, I don't think that's going to happen. And Putin will be worried. He knows that NATO is there. And the G7, we have to remember there was the Japanese were there, the Australians were there, G7 resolve as well. So Putin will be feeling increasingly isolated, but it also sends a very clear message out to, you know, other people who may have territorial desires, like Xi Jinping, that actually an international community, you know, the G7 and NATO coming together with a single message, that he has to be wary of what it is that he's planning in the future. Just
in terms of where we are, obviously there was a lot of talk about Biden and the use of cluster munitions in Ukraine. Many commentators were very deeply worried about that. 130 countries are opposed to the use of cluster munitions. Was it necessary, do you think? Is it necessary at this stage in the war?
Yeah, 100%. And the principal reason behind it is the US have got huge stocks of cluster shells, and these are 155mm artillery shells. The Ukrainians are using 4 to 5 times the number per day than have been predicted in the worst case calculations for high intensity conflict. And therefore, until the defense industrial base of the countries that make shells, the more conventional shells, catches up, and that's been started and will catch up, it's best to give them the stocks of what's there already rather than them having nothing. And I think it's very easy for people to sit on a moral high ground whenever you haven't been in conflict and you haven't been subject to bombardment and you're not getting shot at and your family are not under threat of getting killed, and moralize about what legacy danger that cluster munitions may give. I think if you're actually sitting in a frontline trench, you'd be saying fire anything at them.
I understand completely. Philip, thank you so much for your time this morning. That's Phillip Ingram, former senior military intelligence officer. I think that's a really pertinent point. The moralising. And look, in terms of the cluster munitions and where we are, I think in some way, is it a necessary evil? Is it the way? Because if we let up now, after everything that's been put into there, whilst more weapons are created or indeed given to Ukraine, and Putin makes advances, then is it lost?
Yeah, I do take that point. Obviously, the UK has made a lot of the fact that we are signatories to this scheme that doesn't use cluster bombs, so therefore it's a very difficult position that Sunak finds himself in the sense that he's in between, you know, the US and Ukraine, who both want to use them and are both willing to use them, and obviously the UK, I say, wants to offer that support to the Ukraine, but obviously finds that very difficult to back using this sort of thing. And yeah, I think but that point about the cupboard is potentially bare. You know, the UK has had low stocks essentially of its own munitions, and so therefore to keep, that's partly perhaps why Wallace is fine. Was made the comments he did because obviously he's been struggling to get funding out of the Treasury to arm his own.
Said to me he's angry.
I think so.
I mean, about being overlooked.
I think so. I think that's definitely part of it, and I think he has to having to go to the summit and to have to then deal with the fact that he feels unfairly that he was overlooked for this role, and I think he's obviously going to use his significant sway that he has to kind of be a bit more forthright potentially in his views on some of this stuff.
Indeed, Alan. Thank you very much.